It is a new year with new opportunities and new fantasy output. Players that I'm giving a second chance to going into the 2024 season.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
8 players that you can draft in the late rounds of your Dynasty startup, or maybe that you can trade for them at the very, very low price. So let's get straight into it. All right, starting off with the first player that I'm giving a second chance to, and I think a lot of people are already going to be angry when I mention this guy's name because I put a lot of stock into him. I put a lot of belief in him going into last year. And I think we need to readjust our expectations, and you guys need to readjust my expectations on this guy. And that is Quinton Johnston. Okay. Obviously, I love this guy coming out of TCU last year and just didn't pan out the way we all expected to. He does go to one of the most favorable landing spots for a wide receiver in the 2023 class. Obviously, once again, did not work out. But look, there is a new head coaching regime. There's still the same quarterback and new opportunities. There were a lot of people coming into the 2024 draft that you were concerned that they were going to draft a Martin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors. They don't do that. They go out and draft a Lam McConkey in the second round. Now, I would agree with each and every one of you. Lam McConkey is a better talent than Quinton Johnston. In my rankings right now, I would rather take Lam McConkey every single day. And I guarantee you, I think a lot of people would, right? I would also say that Lam McConkey is the wide receiver one on this team. My outlook for Quinton Johnson is more of a wide receiver two, a high end wide receiver two that has the opportunity to still play in a very powerful offense with Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. Okay, so keep that in mind when I'm bringing this take. I'm not saying Quinton Johnson to be the number one wide receiver. I'm not saying Quinton Johnson should be the Devontae Adams, the Justin Jeffersons of the talents. No, that's not the case. I'm saying Quinton Johnson, we need to give him a second chance with this new head coach regime, with this new opportunities that we could be potentially seeing going into the 2024 season. Obviously, last year didn't pan out the way we hoped for. I mean, I hoped for 38 receptions, 67 targets, under 500 yards, getting 431 yards, and only getting 2 touchdowns. And he played 17 games. He saw a 65.6% snap share. Look, one of the biggest arguments for Quinton Johnson is that targets are earned. Absolutely, targets are earned, and he just didn't earn those targets. I don't know why that was the case. Maybe the Chargers knew they weren't going to be in this contention early and often. But let's break it down. In the first couple weeks of the season, we saw Quinton Johnson play that wide receiver three role. Maybe even we see him playing a very limited role in the first couple games of the season when Keenan Allen was healthy and Mike Williams was healthy. Once Mike Williams goes down, everyone thought that Quinton Johnson was going to be that guy. I thought that I at least get more opportunity, and we just didn't see that. Why? Because he didn't earn those targets. And that's probably one of the biggest things for a wide receiver to grow as an individual player and specifically for fantasy. But once again, we did not see that. Then we see a really small stretch with Quinton Johnson and Justin Herbert, where still he didn't get that opportunity. And we saw some very, very crucial catches. And then the second half of the season, we see him with Easton Stick. Look, if you're telling me right now Quinton Johnson had a fair shot at becoming the wide receiver I believe he could potentially be, or maybe even a wide receiver two on this team, I would say you're lying. I don't think he had the best opportunity. Now he had the snap share. Yes. Was there other obstacles? Were there obstacles in front of him? Absolutely not, because Keenan Allen was hurt and so was Mike Williams. But at the same time, the guy that is more important that needs to create a bond with Quinton Johnson was Justin Herbert, and it just wasn't there. We saw a lot of the times. I went back and watched every single snap target of Quinton Johnson. There was times where absolutely he didn't get separation. There was times where he had really good play calls for him, whether it was screens, quick slants, obviously those deep ball passes where he dropped very crucial. Obviously in the Packers game, he dropped the big one. I'm pretty sure in the New England game, he dropped the big one where he was essentially wide open and having those butterfinger hands. 100%. I completely agree. Drops are an issue. But if you look at the situation as a whole, the drops are the least of the concerns about Quinton Johnson. Is more of the opportunity that he is going to hopefully and wasn't given, or actually wasn't given in 2023, but now going into 2024 with his new head coaching regime and how he is literally the number 2 wide receiver, in my opinion, behind Lamb McConkey, there should be more opportunity. Now, a lot of people say, well, I'd rather have Josh Palmer. I'd rather have, Brendan Rice. I understand. I get it. Maybe you like these guys more as a talent. But I would personally would rather have Quinton Johnson in the hopes and belief, giving him a second chance that maybe he can be a mid to high end wide receiver too. If I'm telling you right now, Quinton Johnson finishes as the wide receiver 26. He has 100 targets. Maybe he has 7 touchdowns. And he caught, I don't know, 70 of those 100 targets. And he was averaging, let's say, 9 to 12 points per game. And that was a top 25 finish. That's a whole new conversation for Quinton. Once again, you have to readjust your evaluation and your expectation that you had for him coming in to his rookie year, and look at the whole obstacle. Look at the bigger picture. I can't personally, tell you in my point of view that Quinton Johnson was given an opportune chance to be successful in this league. Now, I can see both sides of the coin where, well, he didn't have Keenan Allen, he didn't have Mike Williams, and he still didn't get no targets. I completely understand. I just think that we need to completely forget about that because that whole new head coaching regime, all those weapons are off this team. Genuinely, and that's how I'm feeling right now. So, look, give Quinton Johnson a second chance. This is a guy that you can get in the very late rounds of your dynasty startup, and a lot of people are taking thirds, late seconds for him in maybe 2025 or maybe a 2025 third. Now, I would agree. I would not be selling any 2024 seconds because I love almost every single pick that I can get from the 201 to the 212. But if you're telling me right now I could potentially get the 301 for Quinton Johnson, I'll take the opportunity, right? Even in a 2025 class. So once again, readjust your expectations for Quinton and give him a second chance going into 2024. All right, my second player that you need to be giving a second chance to is a quarterback from my beloved New York Football Giants. I know it's crazy to say, that is Daniel Jones. Look, 100%. Daniel Jones has had probably one of the worst seasons in, seasons that he had this past year in 2023. But what is the context around that, right? What did we see this past year for Daniel Jones? He comes out for that first game of the season. His left tackle, Pro Bowl tackle, gets injured in Andrew Thomas. He literally has the most configurations in the NFL. At least the New York Giants had the most configurations of offensive linemen and some of the worst injuries for the offensive linemen in 2023. At one point, we had a full starting lineup that had backups. Now, granted, that's just part of it, right? Daniel Jones was playing bad. Daniel Jones was making terrible mistakes. Daniel Jones was also turning the ball over and doing some crucial things that shouldn't have happened. But at the same time, who were his weapons, right? Saquon Barkley missed the high ankle sprain. Darren Waller was injured. But now this is a completely different regime. This offense and this team that Brian Dable and Joe Schoen has invested in an offensive line by signing John Runyon from the Green Bay Packers, from getting Jermaine Illuminor from the Las Vegas Raiders, hiring a new offensive line coach, right? Yes, you still have Andrew Thomas, John Michael Smith going into his second year. The offensive line should be better. Not only that, they drafted one of the best wide receivers who a lot of people believe was the number one wide receiver in this draft class in Malik Neighbors. What did we see with Brian Dable in Buffalo when we saw them go out and trade for Stephon Diggs? Now, completely different talent, completely different situation, but still, we've seen even our owner and John Mara saying, Daniel Jones, we've done everything possible to make him fail. And that exactly was the case last year. It sucks because not only did he have the neck injury, he misses the neck injury the first half of the season. Then he comes back being all healthy against the Raiders, oddly enough, and tears his ACL. Now, the expectation is that Daniel Jones will be back for the season in week 1 in training camp from everything that is going, from what I'm understanding from all the reports. But we also have to remember the year before that Daniel Jones had in 2022, where he took this team to the playoffs. He took them to the playoffs being the Minnesota Vikings, who was one of the highest scoring teams in the National Football Leagues at the time. And he only did that with Saquon Barkley. He did that with Isaiah Hodgins. He did that with Darius Slayton. He didn't do it with Wan'Dale Robinson. He didn't do it with Darren Waller, right? Like that is what Daniel Jones was doing. He finished as a top 10 quarterback, averaging 18.4 fantasy points per game. Daniel Jones that year was top 5 in rushing amongst quarterbacks with just over 700 yards. In the fantasy points per game that year, he scored more than Tua. He scored more than Trevor Lawrence. He scored more than Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert. Daniel Jones, a year removed, is the reason why he got that $40 million contract. Look, do I want him to be the franchise quarterback? Probably not. But I would rather say, you know what? I can understand what's happening, and maybe this is my bias coming out. Hey, what can you get Daniel Jones for? Can you get him for a late second in a super flex league? Right? Can you get him for an early third? Where are you drafting him in a super flex league? Anywhere later from round 10 and onwards, because no one wants to deal with this situation. That is the type of value that you can get for somebody a year removed, finishing as a top 10 quarterback. And maybe it was a fluke year, but the rushing opportunity is there. Now the offensive line is significantly better. And also Saquon Barkley is not on this team. And Malik Neighbors is going to be peppered with targets where could definitely help Daniel Jones. So give Daniel Jones a second chance. Going into my third player that you should be giving a second chance to, staying at the quarterback position, is Bryce Young. This is a guy that I have been pounding the drum on, saying that you guys need to be going out and buying him for a late first, potentially early second before the NFL draft. And that I genuinely believe that could have paid off for you because of all the moves this team has done. Right? They go out and get Deontay Johnson. They go on and draft Jonathan Brooks. They draft Xavier Legette. Right? They get a better offensive line, with these opportunities and these players that they have signed. Right? You get a new coach in David Canales coming from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who has overturned. We saw Baker Mayfield literally being an almost nothing to being a top 10 fantasy quarterback last year with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin in the mix this past year. Bryce Young, who was the first overall pick just a year removed, now with Dave Canales, now who they, once again, putting these pieces around him and solidifying this offensive line with the weapons. One of the biggest things and concerns for this team was the separation from the wide receivers. They go out and get one of the best separators in the NFL, at least an underrated separator in Deontay Johnson. You still have Adam Thielen, who at some point in time throughout the season was a top 10 wide receiver. Now you get Jonathan Brooks, who is my RB1 in this class. He's coming off an ACL tear, but should be ready. If you can get Bryce Young, who's also going in the later rounds of your dynasty startup because of his situation and because of what happened last year. Look, it wasn't good for Bryce Young. Finished quarterback 23 this past year, averaging 10.4 fantasy points per game. It was terrible for Bryce Young. But that situation has changed because the head coaching regime is gone. New weapons have been added. Think about it. All these guys that I'm bringing for you today, things have switched. Things have shifted in their offense. Their situation around them has changed. And we need to be giving these guys second chances. And I'm not done with Bryce Young. So this is somebody that you need to give a second chance to. All right, my next player on this list at the wide receiver position, we're going to Green Bay, and that is Christian Watson here. Yes, Christian Watson is somebody you need to get a second chance to, because a lot of people have been saying a lot of these other names, Jaden Reed, Dontavion Wicks, Romeo Dubs. Now you have Josh Jacobs in this offense. Christian Watson, I personally believe this gives him a better relief because of all the other weapons that are around him, and let him takes his opportunity and kind of cook the way that we hope and believe that he was going to be when Aaron Rodgers was there. Look, we have to understand when Christian Watson was injured in the first half of the season from weeks 1 to 3, and then he came back. Do you remember what was happening in the conversations around the Green Bay Packers at that time? If I'm not mistaken, they were on a 4-game losing streak. Everyone was saying, is Jordan Love the guy, right? They went on a bye week. They come back. They lose another 2 games against Detroit, who nobody was, not Detroit, Denver, that nobody was expecting. They lose to Minnesota. They lose to Vegas. They lose to Detroit, right? And then they're saying, okay, man, is Jordan Love really this guy? What's going to be happening with him, right? And then we kind of see the switch. We see the switch with Jordan Love in this offense around week 11 when they go out and beat the Los Angeles Chargers. And that's when we saw the switch for Christian Watson and Jordan Love, right? And those 2 weeks after week 11, Week 12, finished wide receiver 13, caught 5 out of 7 targets for over 53 yards and a touchdown. Week 13 against Kansas City, where they won, nobody was expecting, caught 7 out of 9 targets, just over 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. He finishes a wide receiver 8 with over 27.6 yards, or 27.6 fantasy points, excuse me. Now, Christian Watson did struggle with injuries at the second half of the season, where he missed another 5 games. He missed a total of 8 games in this past year. What happens if we have a full season with Christian Watson? What happens if Christian Watson plays with the Jordan Love that we saw in the second half of the season? The reason why Jayden Reed, we saw him emerge in the second half of the season, and I'm not taking anything away from him. I think one of the biggest reasons, I'm not going to say the reason, one of the biggest reasons why Jayden Reed was successful in the second half of the season and was a league winner for you is because actually Christian Watson missed the second half of the season. Now, he did see those glimmers while Christian Watson was on the field, because remember, when Christian Watson was on the field, we saw Jayden Reed's production kind of drop, and then Christian Watson's production increased, but he just couldn't stay healthy the whole time. And he wasn't healthy the whole time when he was back from weeks 4 to 13. We really saw him get healthy for those last 2 games where I just kind of mentioned from weeks 12 to 13. And then he gets re-injured again in week 14, if I'm not mistaken, during practice. And that's when they lose to the Giants and then Tampa Bay. And then they have another run in the second half of the season again. So we saw the emergence of Jordan Love. We've seen what happens when Christian Watson can stay healthy for a minimum of 2 games while he's 100%. Can we give him a second chance? Because a lot of people are not wanting Christian Watson right now. And that may sound crazy, but if we're valuing Jordan Love and Jayden Reed at these higher prices, Christian Watson, who has been a league winner, just like Jayden Reed in the second half of the season, now is with a different quarterback and Aaron Rodgers, they still want to utilize this guy and say, hey, he has the speed, the separation, and everything that he can bring to this offense. So give Christian Watson a second chance. Mi gente, before I get into my next player, go to flogfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what we are doing here. If you want a dynasty team review, if you want our rookie reports, if you want the fantasy hotline, if you want our rankings, all you have to do is sign up using our promo code LAND. You get all those perks and so much more when you use that promo code, signing up and getting 30% off. Our rookie report with our rookie rankings, our tier rankings, our in-depth breakdown of each and every player, our rookies, our sleepers, our hit rates that Zach that has created, which has been phenomenal so far. You get the team review that you've been seeing us go live almost every other day, breaking down teams, helping you in your rookie drafts and trades, right? And you get all the other perks in the community, not only from us, but all the other content creators on flogfantasy.com. So once again, flogfantasy.com/land, the best place to support what Zach and I are doing here. Go sign up. All right, going into my next play here, another wide receiver. Let's stay in the same division as well. Jameson Williams. This guy has had a rough outing for the first 2 years of his career, right? First year in the Natty game, coming in as a rookie, he tears his ACL. We knew he was going to miss his whole rookie season. He comes back for 1 or 2 games in the second half of the season. One of the last games of the season in 2023, we saw him in explosiveness, but just didn't work out the way we panned out for him in his rookie year. His second year has those gambling issues, gets suspended for 6 games and it reduced to 4 games, and he comes back and he's just not somebody that we were expecting. He is not getting the targets that we were expecting. From weeks 5 to 17, the games that he played, he had a total of 24 targets. That's about 2 targets per game, or 2 receptions per game. That is not something that we were hoping and expecting from a first round wide receiver. But the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes down to Jameson Williams is the confidence that this head coaching regime has in him, and the fact that they didn't draft another wide receiver coming into the 2024 season, at least none of significant impact that can take away from Jameson Williams, right? You think of the reports coming out with Dan Campbell saying, look, we're going to unleash Jameson. We believe in him. We want to give him a bigger workload. I guess they needed to see the trust in Jameson Williams after the past, couple years that he had of adversity. And when you see this guy who is a phenomenal separator, who's a deep ball passer, him pairing up with, now I would say this, my expectation for Jameson Williams is not going to be a number 1 wide receiver, but he's not going to be a wide receiver 3. in fantasy. He's not going to be, a low end wide receiver two. I truly believe he can be a high end wide receiver two, where we can see him maybe in that T Higgins range, right? Like he can be the T Higgins for like the Amon-Ra St. Browns, if you get what I'm saying, right? So Jamar Chase and T Higgins, you have the 1-2 punch duo. Then you have Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams. You have AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. That's the type of duo that I'm trying to paint the picture here, because a lot of people are skewing his adversity and maybe struggles that he has with injury and then obviously the gambling stuff for somebody that's just completely dead in fantasy and nobody wants. We need to once again change their perspective, because things have pivoted in this organization, in this offense. You have Jared Goff, who is a phenomenal quarterback, and the pressure doesn't have to be on him. You know why? Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That is why the pressure is not on him. For somebody who's already on a stacked team, he's just another weapon on this team that we need to give a second chance to. And this is a guy that's going in the late rounds of your dynasty startups. So why not take a chance on him as a flyer when you are drafting him in that round? So give Jameson another chance. All right, my next player, another quarterback on this list. I got two quarterbacks coming for you back to back, then a wide receiver, and then a cheeky tight end at the end. So definitely stay tuned here. Gino Smith. I know it's not sexy, it's not exciting, but this is the type of players that we need to give second chances to. These are the type of players that we need to go out. Hey, if you're in a win now team, maybe you're in a hybrid team, and you say, I just need a quarterback. Should I go out and who should I go out and invest in? Geno Smith is a perfect quarterback that you can go out and invest in. Why? Because of the new shifts and pivots that have been happening in his offense and around him. This past year finished as QB 19, averaging 15.7 fantasy points per game. Didn't have the best finish. That is a year removed from finishing as a QB5, averaging 18.5 fantasy points per game. This is a guy that you were relying on an offense that was a high-powered offense with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Now, that does change a little bit because we do have a new offensive coordinator and we do have a new head coach. What's exciting about this offensive coordinator is that he's coming from Washington, where we just saw, if you know anything about college football, obviously this is Dynasty. We know the tremendous talent that's come out of Washington with Rome Odunze, with Jalen McMillan, with Jalen Polk. All these guys have eaten. All these guys were top 3 round picks in the NFL. Not top 3, but top 3 rounds, right? You see Rome Odunze in the first round, Jalen Polk in the second round, Jalen McMillan in the third round. These guys have opportunity to succeed in their respective offenses. And the fact that Geno Smith is going to be paired up with a guy who knows how to distribute the ball to 3 talented wide receivers on their team, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Tyler Lockett with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet there as well. That's exciting. And that's why we need to readjust. We need to pivot. We need to change our tune about Geno Smith and saying, it's just not that. It just wasn't the best. If I'm not mistaken, the year before in 2022, where he finished the top 5 quarterback, he was a comeback player of the year. I think it was him. I could be wrong. I might be DeMar Hamlin actually, but I know a lot of people were mad that Geno Smith didn't win. Right? If I'm remembering correctly now, look, Geno Smith can still be a quarterback that is viable for your team. And what's exciting is that the fantasy points per game that he was out, producing is there. Right? I mean, obviously this past year, 15.9 fantasy points, it's just not, it wasn't the best, but he's done significantly better than most of the year above average quarterback. That is the same range as we saw the Baker Mayfields, the Tua Tags, and Matthew Stafford, right? Only 1 point difference of some of these guys that finished as a top 12 quarterback. Can he bring it together and reel it in with this new offensive coordinator going into the 2024 season, and another guy getting drafted late round in your dynasty startups? Give Geno Smith a second chance. All right, my next guy on the list, I said I was going to bring you another quarterback, which is one more. This is my last quarterback on the list, Deshaun Watson. Now, the morals, set it aside. I get it. I understand. We've had this conversation almost every single time when we talk about Deshaun Watson, but we're talking about fantasy football here. If I tell you that Deshaun Watson in the first half of the season, well, really the first 3 games of the season, was on pace to finish as a top 5 quarterback, would you want Deshaun Watson on your team? Putting everything aside, I think a lot of people would say yes. If I told you that Deshaun Watson was averaging 20.5 fantasy points per game, that's more than Jordan Love, more than Brock Purdy, more than Jared Goff, more than Patrick Mahomes, more than Tua Tagovailoa, more than Baker Mayfield. If we were to extrapolate the first 3 games of the season where Deshaun Watson was healthy, when Deshaun Watson was 2-1, right? Like Deshaun Watson would have finished as a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football. Now, obviously, extrapolation is not perfect. All those numbers is not something that we can really lean on, right? But what we do know from context from this past year is that he struggled with injuries. He missed the majority of the season. He was in and out of the games for almost all the time. He wasn't completing a good percentage of his passes in the first 2 weeks. 55.2 percent of the passings were completed in week 1 against Cincinnati. That game was raining. They go to Pittsburgh, 55% completion rate. Terrible. But then he goes to Tennessee with the 81.8 completion rate, and then we kind of see a pickup for that one game. What happens if he would have played the full season? Once again, putting morals aside, Deshaun Watson, he came back in the second half of the first year in 2023, and in 2022, he only played 6 games. And he was like, okay, the rest is going to come off. He comes to 2023 season. He comes in, first 3 games looking decent, not amazing, not the top 5 quarterback that we knew of Deshaun Watson back in the day. And then he gets injured. And now it's like Deshaun Watson means nothing. Another quarterback going in the late rounds of your dynasty startup, somebody that you can send a mid to late second for Deshaun Watson, maybe an early second in a super flex league, obviously. But you can definitely swindle and create narratives for Deshaun Watson, obviously in the positive, but we can also spin it in the negative. Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, Nick Chubb's coming back from injury with Jerome Ford. The weapons are there. There's no excuses. David Njoku, I didn't even mention. The weapons are there and the passing offense is there. Can Deshaun Watson pull it together and stay healthy going into the 2024 season? I think he can. That's why I'm giving him a second chance. All right, got 2 more players for you here. My first last player, I guess you can say, Johan Dawson. Man, I've been on this guy for a long time. I've been loving everything that he can be bringing to my fantasy team. And what did we believe in 2023? We saw him skyrocketing because Terry McLaurin was injured. Curtis Samuel meant nothing to us at the time. Eric Bieniemy coming from the Kansas City Chiefs. Johan Dawson was a top, 20 wide receiver in Dynasty early off in the season before week 1 started. After that, went all the way down, and he was absolutely nothing. Why? Zach calls him the biggest cock block in fantasy, and that is Curtis Samuel. You know where he's at now? The Buffalo Bills. You know who's a new, offensive coordinator and head coach on this team? Dan Quinn, new head coach. New offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury. You know who's a new quarterback for this team? A guy who had 2 first-round wide receivers go in the first round? Jaden Daniels is a new quarterback of this offense as well. Johan Dawson is the first-round capital. The talent's there for Johan Dawson. I've loved him coming out of college, out of Penn State. He just hasn't had the opportunity. And then when he does have the opportunity, he gets injured or is overtaken by someone like a Curtis Samuel because it fit Eric Bieniemy's regime a little bit better. We need to give Johan Dawson a second chance because you can get him on the low. You can get him in the mid to late rounds of your dynasty startups, and a guy that I personally believe can easily be a high-end wide receiver 2 on your dynasty team. Look, Johan Dawson, once again, didn't have the best season this past year. I completely agree, right? I mean, this guy was averaging 4.5 fantasy points per game. He finished as a wide receiver 57, caught 49 out of 83 targets, just barely broke 500 yards. This is what have I been saying all video? What has shifted? What has changed? What is pivoting? What is the scenarios and the surroundings looking like around Johan Dawson? Another guy, once again, you can get in the late rounds. And if you can, I'm willing to do that. I mean, this is a phenomenal opportunity for you to get a first round wide receiver that is not being crucified from his drops, not being crucified because he's not talented. He just hasn't gotten the opportunity. Respectfully, I mean, you can probably paint this picture in the same light just a little bit for Quinton Johnson and Johan Dawson, which I had Johan Dawson as a higher talent coming out of college. But obviously, situation is different, talent's different, quarterback situation was different. Quinton Johnson going through a new coaching regime, same thing with Johan Dawson. The quarterback change is not the same, players ahead of him, et cetera, et cetera. I get it. Give him a second chance. Give Johan Dawson a second chance, guys. All right, and last but not least, of course, I had to give you a tight end that you need to give a second chance to. A guy that we love. If you guys know it, you know Pat the Dragon. Pat Frymuth is a guy that you need to be giving a second chance to. I mean, I sound like a broken record, but what has changed? You tell me. Quarterback has changed. Offensive coordinator has changed. Situation around him has changed. The offensive line has changed, where he probably doesn't have to block anymore. I mean, this offense has completely shifted. Now, one of the biggest things for this past year for Pat Frymuth was his injuries. He missed a big chunk in the middle of the season, and the quarterback play was atrocious. Kenny Pickett was probably one of the worst quarterbacks that we saw this past year, and a quarterback carousel. Pat Frymuth only had 2 games where he scored over double-digit points, and that was in week 3, where he caught 3 out of 4 and a touchdown. And then week 12, which he had one, I would say a career game, if I'm not mistaken, caught 9 out of 11 for 120 targets, over 21 fantasy points. He finished as a tight end 1 that week. Pat Frymuth coming into this season was saying, okay, we were liking Pat Frymuth. We were believing in his opportunity with Kenny Pickett and how that offense was humming in preseason. But they completely gave us the ookie dukes. We definitely got thrown around for a ride when it came down to this offense. But now when you think about what's going to be happening going into the 2024 season with Russell Wilson, who doesn't have the best history with tight ends, but if it's not Russell Wilson, it's Justin Fields, who has good history with tight ends, where we've seen Cole Kmet finish as a top 5, top 8 tight end, for the past 2 years. Now you have George Pickens, you have Roman Wilson now in this offense. And once again, the offensive line, which the Pittsburgh Steelers have built throughout in the past couple of years, is phenomenal now. It should be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, at least top 10 in the NFL after, I would say, in the next couple of years, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even this year. But Pat Frymuth coming into this offense, and if he can stay healthy where this offense is humming, and then create simple dink and dunks for the quarterback position. Now, Arthur Smith is probably one of the biggest things people are saying. Arthur Smith sucks. He didn't do it with Kyle Pitts. I get it. He didn't do it with Kyle Pitts. He didn't whatsoever. But I think it takes a lot of pressure away from Arthur Smith not being the head coach for Atlanta Falcons, just being a play caller for the Pittsburgh Steelers, where Mike Tomlin is going to be putting a lot of pressure on him from the rip, okay? So keep in mind, guys, these are guys that we need to give a second chance. And Pat Frymuth is a guy who's coming off a top 12 finish the year before. 63 targets, 63 receptions, 98 targets, over 700 yards. Pat Frymuth was a top 6 tight end in targets the year removed in 2022, 2 years removed in 2022. So we need to be aware of what we're kind of getting ourselves into and the type of talent that we do have with someone like a Pat Frymuth going into the 2024 season. Those are my players. Those are the players that I believe you should be giving a second chance to. And if not giving a second chance to, seeing where you can be getting them in the late rounds of your dynasty startups, or maybe trying to acquire them on the very, very low. Comment down below. Let me know what you think. It's been a long video, but I appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.